In this video, I'm going to walk you through a quick and easy process for forecasting in paid search. Just to give you some context, if you work in-house, if you're an in-house paid search practitioner, maybe for like an e-commerce company, for example, you're likely going to be tasked with projecting future revenue and future spend. So when I worked in-house, we would do an annual forecast and we would reforecast throughout the year, typically on a quarterly basis. As we saw new events or trends kind of unfold, or if we were beating the forecast, 3 months into the year, then we'd reforecast to up the numbers to make sure that we had more accurate projections for where we would land and also what resources we need. And it's also important for operations too, right? The operation side of the business needs to understand, what sorts of, like purchasing, for example, what products they need to make sure they have stock on in order to be ready for the projected growth and spend, when it's coming. But anyway, so in this video, I'm going to walk you through a quick process for forecasting your spend and your revenue levels for a future year. You could also take this same process and apply it on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis. I'm going to be doing this for a channel level, so I'm going to forecast all of the paid search spend for the entire year. But you could also take this process and apply it to campaign level or ad group level data, and that's also probably a good idea to make your forecast more accurate. So the premise of this forecast is, we want to understand what is the rate at which our revenue is going to increase as we increase our spend, because it's not going to be a one-to-one rate. Another 100% increase in spend is not going to yield 100% increase in revenue, right? And so how do you understand what is the rate of diminished returns in the channel? You're going to see diminished returns because in order for you to grow the channel, you generally are going to have to outbid other competitors in the ad auctions, meaning you're going to be spending more per click, not just for those incremental clicks, but for all of the clicks at that point, right? So your spend will always grow by a greater amount than your revenue. There's a couple ways to forecast diminishing returns. I think probably one of the better options is using the bid simulator data available through Google Ads. But that's not really practical. It's very difficult to export that in bulk. You can do it from the API, but it's also not going to be available for all your campaigns or ad groups. So a more direct and practical method is to use a square root model. The square root model is assuming that the whatever percentage increase you see in spend, your revenue will grow by the square root of that increase. Meaning that your revenue will always grow by a lesser amount than your spend. So I'll give you an example. If your spend is projected to grow 75%, well, the square root of 75% is 32%. Right? So we're projecting that your revenue will grow 32% on that 75% increase in spend. And so would that be profitable for you? TBD, right? But that's what we're going to use this process to try to identify. So to start out, it's pretty easy to do. First, identify what period you're going to be working with. In this case, I'm going to be making projections based on the last 12 months of data. So I have my 12 months of spend here, where this is a fictional example. We're going to say it's 1.5 million in spend. The last 12 months of revenue with the current level of optimization. Again, this forecast is, this part of the forecast is not going to account in any way for campaign improvements, structural changes, new products being added, anything like that. This forecast will not account for those changes. So our revenue in the last 6 months, we'll say, was 6 million. Cost of goods and variable overhead expenses, you can see here. So we're just using a flat assumption. We're assuming that all, COGS and variable overhead expenses combined are a blended average of 65%. You may have your own shorthand percentage you want to use here, or you may have a more accurate weighted figure, but it's really important that you have some sort of assumption for calculating profitability, because without that, you're not going to be able to understand, at what percentage increase in spend will you no longer be profitable on that increase in spend. Estimated contribution dollars. So contribution dollars is your revenue less your cost of goods and variable overhead less your spend. So this is operating profit from the channel. So this is the portion of revenue that's going to flow through to cover, help cover fixed costs for the business, right? Like salaries and rent and so on. You can see on this model, we have, on these numbers, we have 6 million in spend. 6 million in revenue. After 65% COGS and variable overhead, and after 1.5 million in spend, we're left with $600,000 in contribution or profit. And contribution percentage, this is your rate of profit. So, we have an available gross margin of 35%, the reciprocal of the COGS. And of that 35%, we're keeping 10% as profit, right? So 10% of revenue is flowing through to profit at the end of the day. Another way to interpret that is 25% of our revenue is ad spend. So we're spending 25% to generate a sale, and we're only getting to keep 10% of that sales profit. So at first glance, this is these numbers are a bit inefficient. But the square root model is going to help us understand, should we be pulling back on spend in order to generate greater contribution dollars, or should we be pushing more aggressively, and will we see greater contribution dollars at a lesser contribution margin percent? So to do this, I want you to create a table. It's pretty simple. You need 4 metrics. You need your annual spend level. So this is going to be our projection of what our spend will be in the next year. And we're going to go run in $50,000 increments here. And we'll probably go up to like 3 million in spend or so. So let's do that. We'll go to 2.4 million. Okay, next we need to project what our revenue is going to be at this spend level, right? This revenue projection, you can see the formula here. We're using the square root function in Excel, and we're basically calculating this as our our variance in spend. So this is our current spend minus our previous spend. I'm sorry, current. When I say current spend, A14 is our new spend, let's say. B1 is our old spend divided by our old spend. That's going to give you your variance as a percent, right? So if our spend is decreasing by 10% or increasing by 20%, that's the variance percentage. And then we're taking the square root of that percent and multiplying it by our revenue, right? So if the spend increases 75%, the revenue is projected to increase 32%. Just as a disclaimer, it is not recommended to use this for really significant changes. So if you're, if you're trying to forecast, increasing your spend level, like 10x, there will probably be some diminishing rate of accuracy in this process when you get into much more significant changes like that. But for I think most people, this will be pretty useful. All right, so we project our revenue to be a little over 1 million at that spend level. Projected contribution. Now this is just simply recalculating our contribution dollars based on the 65% cost of goods, the projected revenue, and the spend. And then contribution percentage. This is contribution dollars divided by our revenue. It's our rate of profit. So now we are going to drag this down, and you can see, at these different levels of spend, where we think our profit dollars will be greatest, or what the profit will be, what the revenue will be, etc. So we're at 1.5 million in spend right now. So that's here. All right, at a 10% contribution, or contribution margin. So if you look, you can see that the contribution dollars are projected to be greater if we were actually to spend less and have less in revenue for this account. That's really important. Sometimes growing an account means spending less, or improving the health of a business means spending less and having fewer orders. Other times there's benefits to pushing more aggressively for more volume. But so you can see, based on this model, we're projecting that somewhere in the ballpark of $750,000 in spend would yield our max profit at about $735,000. Right, so at a 17% contribution percentage. All right, so that's good info. We might move forward with the assumption that, hey, 17% margin is probably more more closely aligned with what will yield maximum profit for the business. And we're at 10% right now, so we're definitely overspending. And I'm going to put this in a chart to make it a little bit easier to visualize. Okay. So I don't need to plot our margin percent. Okay. All right, so you can see here in this chart, the orange line is going to be our projected contribution dollars. So you can see, when you're super efficient, right, and you're not spending very much, you don't have a lot in sales, and there's probably a significant benefit to spending more aggressively to drive more volume, and you see contribution dollar growth as a result of volume growth, right? Even though you're becoming less efficient, it's you're still giving up very little of your total sales as ad spend at that point. But once you reach a certain point, as you start to spend more and more in the program, you're spending more and more to acquire those clicks, but the clicks aren't necessarily increasing in value. And depending on your margins will dictate how far you can go before you start to see this inevitable decline or diminished return on your spend, right? And so in this case, having more revenue is, of course, has benefits for maybe growing the business in other ways. Maybe you have really high lifetime value or high repurchase rate. But based on first order performance, you see the profit dollars are declining, even though your sales are going up. Right. So the inflection point where profit dollars are greatest is somewhere around here. And that would be our projection of $750,000 in spend. All right, so for an account like this, if the goal were to try to grow contribution dollars, and then I would start to project massive cutbacks in spend, and also I project that they're going to sell 1.8 million less approximately next year, but they'll be much more profitable. That's good info to have, right? They don't want to buy almost $2 million worth of inventory if they're just going to sit on it and have to liquidate it at some point, right? So forecasting is important. This is, I think, a really useful way to inform your projections. I would not recommend basing an entire forecast only on this model. The most important part of a forecast, in my opinion, is you and your managerial experience. What opportunities do you think there are to grow in a program, right? If it's a really mature program, then you probably already saturate a lot of the opportunities to improve the account. But if you're if it's a newer program or it's been mismanaged in the past and you're new to the team, then you might have a lot of opportunities for growth outside of just spending more or less. Anyway, hope this was clear. If you'd like any more information, we do go into a little bit more detail on this subject in our ebook, which we'll have a link to in the description below. Thank you.